So this is going to be a hopefully fairly quick demo of what Rails has to offer, especially given some of the brainstorming that we've done over sort of all the things that we need to know as web developers. I ran one step while we were on break, which was I had Rails generate a new project for me. And the way that that works is you run Rails new and then the name of the project. And in my case, that was Bloggy van Blag. So I'm going to make a blog, just like all of you made for WebDev 2, but I'm going to lean heavily on the things that Rails has to offer to allow me to build it quickly. So when you run this, so Rails is many things. Before I get ahead of myself, Rails is a framework. It is also a command line tool. It is also a curated collection of gems, some of them maintained by the Rails core team, and some of them are other open source projects that are used as part of Rails. So it's a number of different things. We all installed Rails when we went through our installation instructions, and that was just by way of a gem install Rails. What happens when you run Rails new is it creates a file folder structure for you. Every Rails project looks pretty much the same in terms of Bloggy van Blag. In terms of the folders that are available to you, app, bin, config, db, lib, log, node modules for your JavaScript stuff, public for public files that you're serving out, storage, test, temp, and vendor. We spend most of our time in this app folder. That's where our MVC stuff tends to live. Models, views, controllers, assets live in here, images and style sheets. JavaScript used to, now it lives right here. Jobs, Rails has a built-in queuing system, so job queue stuff goes in here. Channels, I think that's for active cable, which is an abstraction over top of like real-time sockets, web sockets. And mailers, Rails has the ability of sending and receiving emails as part of your application as well. And so we'll see some of this stuff. We'll look at some of the MVC stuff today. When working with Rails, we also spend quite a bit of time in the config and db folders. And the config is where configuration happens. We'll do a little bit of config stuff today. And db is where your database kind of stuff happens. And so I ran the Rails generator. It generated this file folder structure. It also already assumed that I was using Git, and it made my website Git enabled. And so there's already a .git folder. It's already ready to add and commit initial. Okay. So that's one other assumption. There's also this gem file here. This is the list of gems that Rails depends upon. And part of running Rails new, it went and ran bundle install in our folder already for us and pulled in all of these gems and those gems dependencies and the dependencies of those gems. And so you have like first and second and third and fourth generation dependencies that are pulled in. And then you get a gemfile.lock, which shows you all of the gems, their dependencies, and the versions that you're using. And so you could leave this application alone for 10 years and hopefully be able to come back to it, and it would just work because not only do you know which libraries it depends upon, but you know the exact versions of those libraries that it depends upon. And so this file is like 200 some odd lines long of all the different dependencies and sub-dependencies that a Rails project depends upon. So that's already happened. I'm going to mess around with that a little bit more today as well. First, though, what I want to do is I'm going to run Rails S, which is short for Rails server. So I'm in my project folder. I navigated to it with a CD, And if I run Rails S or Rails server, it's going to boot up a development server for me, so an HTTP server. It uses Puma, which is a implementation of an HTTP server in Ruby, and so it pulls up a server on localhost port 3000. And I'm running on the WSL, but the neat thing about the magic behind how the WSL works with Windows is it sort of shares the networking space. And so I don't, like when I used to do development in a virtualized container, then I would have to do like port mapping. So I could actually like hit the server that was on the virtual thing that I was running, if it was a virtual Ubuntu or whatnot. But with the WSL, I don't need to do that. I can just go straight up to localhost 3000. And so, oops, that's not what I wanted. I want this. And without doing anything, we get a test page. And this is just the ability to do sort of a smoke test. Is the Rails server working? And it says, yeah, you're on Rails, and it tells us the version of Rails we're on and the version of Ruby we're currently using. And so that means that like everything as far as the server goes is operational, and I can start adding to my application now. And so I'm going to continue to run the server in the background. The server is also where we're going to see debugging information like we saw when we were working with Active Record. So anytime Active Record is generating SQL for us and that SQL is being executed, we'll see that in the server logs that are being output to standard output. And so I'm going to open a second terminal now in the same folder, and I'm going to generate some of my website. So some of what you can do with Rails, you can sort of hand code things, but being sort of in the Ruby ecosystem where the idea of code generation is considered to be sort of an interesting tool to rely on, Rails has generators that help us build certain aspects of our sites. So I can say Rails generate, or just Rails G. And what do I want to generate? I want to generate a scaffold. And I like to think in my head of a scaffold as like an MVC bundle. It's going to be a model, a bunch of views, and a controller that are all pre-written for me for a particular entity that I want to save in the database. And what I want to save is a blog post. And to keep things simple, my blog post is simply going to have a title, which is going to be a string, and some content, which is going to be text. So this is one of the few instances in a Ruby application when we actually are thinking about types explicitly rather than implicitly. And at a database level, a string is going to become a varchar, like a 255 length varchar, and text is going to be like a text blob, so not limited in size. So that is the difference between those two. And I'm going to hit enter. And so when I hit enter here, a few things are going to be generated for me. A migration is going to be generated for me, and Rails uses migrations to track the changes that we make over time to our database. Because if we're working on a team and I add a new database table, how does the rest of the team know that suddenly there's a new database table in the application? Or if I change a database table and remove a column or rename a column or replace a column, how does the team get that update? Well, in a Rails project, they do so by way of migrations, which are chunks of code that alter our database in different ways. And so those are stored with our version control. So you just get the latest, version of the repo and you run your migrations, and then your database, your local database, will be the same as everybody else's. It also allows you to work with version control such that if you need to go back in time to an old version of your application, you can also go back in time to an old version of your database so that the schema of that database is the same as what it was at the time that code was written. So it's a very powerful tool. So you can see these things a bunch of things were generated for us. We're going to go look at the migration that was generated for us and the model that was generated for us. We're going to look at the controller that was generated for us and some of the views. Yeah, that's what we'll look at for now. I'll start with the migration. Create table blog posts. So I scaffolded a blog post camel case. That's what I get inside of my model. My model is a blog post. Inherits from application record. Application record itself just inherits from active record base. And so it's similar to what we've been working on. This is a model. Here's that idea of the model mapping to the pluralized version of the model name, going from camel case to snake case. So blog post maps to blog posts, and that's going to have a title column that is a string and a content column that is text. It's also going to have timestamps that are managed by Rails itself, created at and updated at timestamps. And another thing that's not mentioned here is the ID, which is the primary key. So doesn't yet exist. I can make it exist by running my migrations, which is a Rails DB migrate. That goes to the migration folder. Every migration is timestamped, and Rails knows which migrations it has run and which it has not run yet. And so if I try to run it again, that's not a problem. There's nothing left to run. And by default, again, Rails likes this idea of sort of sane defaults that you can configure over later. We already have a database set up, which is a SQLite database, a serverless database that just exists as a file, like we were using when we were using Active Record outside of Rails. And it's right here in my DB folder. There's that development.sqlite3. So I now have that table. That table exists. I now have a model. I now have a controller that has a bunch of different methods that all interact with my model. And you can see in the comments, each one of those methods is mapped by way of our routing system to a URL. So for example, a GET request, an HTTP GET request to /blog posts will trigger this index. And that's configured elsewhere. So the comments aren't meaningful. They're not making that connection. That connection is being made in a routing file. A GET request to /blog post /some primary key will load up the blog post associated with that entry in the database. /blog post /new, you're going to get a new form. So let's see what some of this actually looks like. If I go to /blog posts, new blog post, first post. This is the content of the first post. And I create it. Woo, look at that. CRUD, right? Pre-built CRUD for us. I can edit. Maybe I realized I needed to be even more enthusiastic about that first post. Put a few ones in there too. And then update it. So you get full CRUD, right? Go back over here. It lists the blog posts. I can also interact with my database from behind the scenes, right? So I can go into a Rails console, which is a version of IRB, the interactive Ruby prompt, but that is also aware of the Rails environment. And so I can go to blog post and create a second post with some content. This is the second post. And that immediately shows up inside of my web application. I can delete, edit, and I can also show individual blog posts. And that's where if I change the primary key, it'll load up the associated post. So there's the second post versus the first post. So that's pretty nifty. You get all that baked in. It builds a bunch of CRUD for you. It's also impressive just to sort of show off. Rails developers, truthfully, don't actually lean on scaffolding all that much, often because there's gems that do this kind of auto CRUD generation, but do it even better. And so later on this course, we're going to look at something called active admin. And just by plugging in this one gem, you get a whole backend administrative panel with usernames and passwords and CRUD and table management and commenting if you wanted to for a custom CMS site. So it basically just is like a gem that turns your Rails app into an instant CMS with administrative logins and editing capabilities and all that jazz. It's really, really nice. The other thing that you get right out of the box with Rails is an API. So if I add .json to the end of any one of these URLs, we see that it's also going to return JSON data to us. And so there's the JSON data. You can pretty print it or show it. Firefox sort of shows it in a sort of a more parsed out way. That's pretty incredible too, right? So it's a straight up built-in RESTful API. So it's using that idea of representational state transfer, meaning that the API should be discoverable, meaning that you go to this base URL and then it shows you the entities that comprise the different entries of blog posts, and each one has a link to the JSON representation of that particular page. So I could go to that particular page, so I could go to like /blogposts 1.json and do that. And we can also like post to particular endpoints with JSON and have new blog posts being created as well. So that's pretty darn nifty too. Let's do a few things here. Let's go into here. I'm gonna just do my git add and commit scaffolded a log. Okay. I'm gonna make a few edits here and there to save you from seeing me actually type out a bunch of stuff. I'm gonna copy and paste from some sets of things that I coded up, about an hour before class today. And so what am I going to start with? I'm going to start with sort of making our system look a little bit more like an actual blog. And so if we look behind the scenes here, this is a table that's being rendered. With each row being represented, each post being represented as a row. Probably not how you would want to style a blog post. So we're going to sort of restructure the HTML on this page, and then we'll apply a little bit of styling to it as well. And so that means we're going to go to our views. So we got a sneak peek at the controller. So if we look at the blog post controller, this is the one that we're working with right now. This is the index page, and it goes to the blog post model and asks for all blog posts. And it saves that to an instance variable called blog posts. And what then happens is automagically Rails is going to go to the views folder, look for a blog posts subfolder, and then look for a view that matches the name of the controller action. In our case, that's index.html.erb. And here's that table we saw inside of the source code there. And you can see the view gets access to this instance variable. So this is one of the places where Rails decides to like break with object-oriented conventions, right? Normal Ruby-based object orientation, our instance variables are private. In Rails, they get shared with the views, and we can do things like we did in PHP. So this part of Rails is going to be very reminiscent of like PHP as a templating language, but instead of like less than question mark PHPs, we have less than percentages being our delimiters. And I think I need to add to VS Code an extension to have it better format my HTML.erb because it's breaking right now. It thinks this is supposed to be HTML only, and it's like seeing a bunch of errors here. So I think I have to do a little bit of work there, but I won't do that right now. So I'm going to go to the other version of VS Code that I have open, and I'm just going to copy and paste. So on this one here, I'm going to delete everything, and then on this one here, gonna yank and paste everything. Moved a few things around, added a little bit of classes for some upcoming styling I'm going to apply here. The link to the new blog post I've got up at the top now rather than the bottom. I extracted out the loop that was looping over all of the blog posts. Notice it's just like what we did in PHP, right? We're jumping in and out of like embedded Ruby and HTML. So embedded Ruby goes from here to here. We open up a each loop with a do, and then the matching end is down over here. And everything else in the middle is like a mixture of more ERB and HTML. And so like inside of a header, I'm echoing out a title. And here's the contents. And then here are links to like a permalink for the blog and the edit and then destroy. And so if I go back over to the site here, a little bit more like a blog. Not super pretty, but at least it's now structured in like post after post after post rather than all inside of one big table. It would be nice to have a little bit more content to work with before I get into the styling. And so for that, I'm going to go and mess with my gem file a little bit. So here's my gem file. I'm going to add the faker gem. I'm also going to, in anticipation of deploying, I'm going to move the SQLite gem into this development block, gems that belong in development mode. And then I'm also going to create a group for production gems. And in there, I'm going to put in the Postgres gem, because we tend to deploy Rails websites to Postgres as the database, but when we develop them, we often are using SQLite. So that's a little bit of just preliminary work, because I know later on when I go to deploy, I need to do that. Mainly, I wanted to get faker in here. So anytime we alter the gem file, so git status, see, I've altered the gem file. I'm going to do a bundle install here, and it should grab those gems. The PG gem is now in there. The faker gem is now in there. That's great. And I want to generate some fake data with faker, and I can do that inside of the DB folder in this seed script. This is a script for pre-populating data into our database. And so again, I'm going to grab a pre-written seed script here that makes use of faker. At the beginning of the seed script, it's always going to blow away all current entries in the database. So I'm always just truncating the table. And then I'm going to create 10 entries, 10 different blog posts, where I'm using faker's hipster module to generate a title. And it generates 4 words for me inside of an array. I map over those words and capitalize each one of them, and then I join them using the space as a separator. And then for the content, I'm going to also use hipster to get a paragraph of text of at least 14 sentences, but sometimes adding random sentences to it. So I can run this seed script here from the command line with a Rails DB seed. And I can go back over to blog. 90s cardigan, asymmetrical kombucha. Let's get some of that. Now I have some data in here, right? It's looking a little bit more like a blog post, and it's funny. Now I might want to start styling, right? So I put in some styling classes into here already. I want to quickly pull in the Bulma framework, and I also want to remove some of the auto styling that Rails put in. So if we were to look in our, oh, this is the wrong folder. I'm in this one here. If we were to look in our assets style sheets folder, we would see that when we run scaffolding, Rails adds a bunch of stuff for us. And I'm going to remove some of that stuff. I'm going to say that goes away, and oops, not that. Keep that in. I'll get rid of these links. And then the rest of this can stay for now. Labels fine. Errors are fine. Okay, so I did a little bit of tweaking of the existing styles. In the past, I was using a lot of Bootstrap. I've started to use this system now called Bulma. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of exposure to it right now. To start using Bulma, I just need to drop in a single link tag into my document. One of the things that you'll notice with a Rails application is the views are not complete HTML documents, right? They don't have the head or the open body or the HTML tag. They're just sort of what would go into the body itself. And then there's a layout file into which all views are injected. And so if I want to add something like a style sheet, I got to go into that other file. And so that's in the views layouts folder, and it's called the application layout. Application.html.erb. There it is. It's an HTML5 document. There's like the title of my blog. Maybe I want to change it slightly to space it out. There's where each view is being injected. And so I'm going to just go again, just like the other one, I'm going to go grab this pre-written from the other application I have. So I'll go up here and I will delete all of this. Yeah, delete that. And then here I will copy all of that, paste it all over here. So here I am linking in Bulma. I put font awesome in there because I was going to use some funky icons, but I ran out of time, so we don't even need that one in there. And then for Bulma to start working nicely, I need to yield into a div with a class of container and a section with a class of section. Similar to Bootstrap in that you just sort of add classes to different elements to get different styling rules or different components. Same thing's going in my index here. I have some classes like title is one, or on my button, or on the new blog post link, I have it giving it a class of button and is primary. And here for my blog posts, I have them being sort of spit out inside of a thing of div class card, of the card header and content. Those are all Bulma specific classes, so that when I go back to my website and reload it, it looks a little bit nicer, right? I've got a nice fancy button here. The button has rounded corners. That's fancy. Thank you. Yeah. That's the limits of my design skills, is like rounding corners. Sometimes drop shadows too. But yeah, here's the card element. Here's, these things. It just looks a little bit more professional now without a lot of work, right? Just had to drop in that Bulma. Now it might be nice, proud of my blog, I want to deploy it to the internet, right? So deployment time, step one, I have to make sure that it is completely saved to Git because I'm going to use Git as my deployment mechanism. I also want to make sure that there's a little bit more work I need to do, but that's fine. Git status, git add, commit, figure gem, seed script, and some styling. That should have been multiple commits, right? We shouldn't be stacking commits like that, but that's fine for our demonstration purposes at least. And I'm going to now go to my Heroku account. So I have an account on Heroku, which is a cloud hosting company. Started its life as a Rails only hosting company. You can now host all sorts of applications, Node ones or PHP ones. And I can just say, well, I want a new app. And this is going to be my Bloggy van Blag. It's available. There's my region. This is what we talked a little bit about earlier, like where is this going to be hosted? Heroku builds on top of Amazon Web Services, but they only support 2 regions, US and Europe. So I use Heroku for testing purposes, but I don't ever use it for production purposes. And then I click Create App. There's multiple ways now to tie my code into Heroku. I could push my code up to GitHub, and I could have Heroku watch a particular branch. And anytime that branch would update, it would just deploy my site and the latest changes. I can also use like a Heroku, what's called the Heroku toolkit. And that's what I'm going to use. I pre-installed this so that you don't have to watch an install meter going. And so at the command line here, I say Heroku login. And it just sort of vets me as I'm logged in now. And then I go back over to here and it gives me a few things that I should do. I've already initialized a Git repository, but I'm going to use the Heroku command to add a new remote to my Git. So git remote -v shows me that I now have a remote. You've probably only used a remote like Origin, which is like your GitHub. You can have multiple remotes. So I can have Origin, like GitHub as an Origin remote, and I can have Heroku as a separate remote because Git is a distributed version control tool. So we can have as many different remotes as we want. And I can now push. I can do like a git push to this remote to deploy my app. The one thing that I need to be aware of, though, is the fact that on Heroku, SQLite is not supported. Heroku has decided to use what's called an immutable file system for their deploys. So you deploy your code to Heroku, you don't have full write access to the file system after that. So you can't just save images to the file system. You can, but they just get wiped away. I don't know what the rate is, if it's every day or every hour or every redeploy. But the file system isn't considered to be safe. And so SQLite, which is a database that is based on the file system, it's just not going to fly. So their default is Postgres. So I have to do one thing, which is my local version is still using SQLite 3, but I'm going to go open up the database config file. So that's in my config folder, which is where, not in my app folder, there it is. The database config file is right here. And I'm going to go down to the bottom. I'm going to leave SQLite as the default for my development, but for production, I'm going to bring in, again, a little pre-written stuff here. Just these lines were provided to me by, or provided for me by Heroku. Just paste those in. So in production mode, because Rails runs in different modes. It runs in development mode, where it sort of is more giving you feedback as a developer. You get more stuff being output to the logs and whatnot. And in production mode, it runs faster, and it's sort of set up for production. So in production, we're going to use Postgres, and it's going to pull the app's username and password from an environment variable running up on Heroku. So I don't need to worry about that. So fingers crossed, let's see if I can deploy my website. Git status, git commit -m, added the production DB stuff for Heroku. Git push Heroku master. So I'm going to push my master branch to Heroku. It detects that it's a Rails application. It runs bundler to get all of the associated gems that it needs. If I had accidentally left SQLite in there, it would fail. It would say, hey, saw that you left SQLite in there. We don't support that. So it would sort of flag that as being a thing that we cannot use. But you can see it was pulling in PG there. So it's going to pull in all the required gems on the sort of the virtual, I think Heroku calls them like dynamos or dinos. Are they dinos? That's a cool thing. Like a dinosaur that serves out web applications. And so we're going to have to wait a little bit here, but it's going to run through all these things, and then it's going to make a little virtual version of our site and deploy it to a URL for us. So now it's going through the JavaScript package management stuff. We're not really using JavaScript in our app at this point in time. I tried to, before class, create a Rails app that didn't include JavaScript package management because I just thought it would speed up the process, but it failed. And so there's like a bug in Rails around that. Some of the asset pipelines kicking in here, like our CSS is being compiled from SAS. And it looks like we're at the end of the step, so fingers still crossed, I think this worked. Two more things are needed. I need to run my migrations because I need to have those database tables, or at least the database table, exist on the database, right? So just like I had to run Rails DB migrate locally, I can ask Heroku to run Rails DB migrate remotely. And I can even run Heroku Rails C, and I can get into that interactive Ruby prompt right up on the remote and mess around if I needed to for like debugging purposes or whatnot. Or to live dangerously and like update production data live on the server. That's always a thing that's fun to do. And then I'm going to run my seed script because I want the database to be populated with at least 10 entries so that we have something to look at. And then somewhere up here, it told me my URL. So it's the name of my project, bloggyvanblag.herokuapp.com. If you pay for Heroku, you can add things like custom domain, right? So you can just like register your own domain and you don't have to use the Heroku one. That is the home page. There is no home page right now for my application. So that's a routing issue that I could deal with. But I should be able to go to the blog posts, and there is the app deployed, and I can do all the things, right? A little bit dangerous because there's no usernames and passwords up on this thing. So, you know, like anyone can go and create. The rest of my application also isn't as nicely styled as that one page that I hit, but at least this page looks nice. Putting a username and password in place is also not very difficult. It should effectively be like 1 or 2 lines of code to put in at least just a hard-coded admin username and password. what else can I think of that might be beneficial? We can do a few minor things here. So one of the things that bothers me is this, like, the fact that this homepage isn't there. So that'll give us an opportunity to peek a little bit at the routing system. So routing is the one aspect of these styles of frameworks that doesn't get included in the MVC acronym, right? There's model view controller, but routing is always a big part of that. So it really should be like RMVC, which is the style of these things. So let's do that. And if I go to guides.rubyonrails.org and I go to the Getting Started with Rails guide, I can also look at the basic auth stuff. Okay. So I will go into the app controllers into my blog post controller, and here I'm going to paste in a username of Wally. Oh, we'll go to the old one, Ghostface. That's the server side 2.1. Oops, and this is Killa. Why are you moving around like that? Killa. And I want it to happen when? I don't want it to happen on index or show, but I want it to happen for everything else. So is accept a thing? Let me just quickly think about that. Rails API. HTTP basic authentication with that's the one. Well, I'll just cheat and just say only for create, update, new, edit, and destroy. And that will be all inside of an array. So that should add a username and password for me. The other thing I said that I would like to do before we are done for today is to fix up the routing slightly. That's in the DB folder. So we're going to go to, sorry, that's in the config folder. And we're going to go to a routes.rb file. And here we have a single line in here, resources, blog posts. This is what builds our RESTful routes for a particular thing. So the fact that all of those various routes exist for each one of these things is because of this one line. It builds all 7 RESTful routes. And so the 7 RESTful routes are a route for index, show, new, edit, create, update, and destroy. I'm going to add a root route. So I'm going to say root to, and I'm going to have it go to the blog posts index action. I can check this out locally, and so I can go to my local instance here, and hopefully now when I go to the root, it shows the blog. That's handy. And if I go to new, it's going to ask for a username and password, and that works. No, I don't need to save it. And so I've added authentication, sort of hokey authentication right now. It's hard coded, but you know, it wouldn't take much more to add a database to it at that point. And now I can redeploy the application. So I can go here and I can get status, and I can get add, and I can get commit -m added basic auth and a root route, and I can git push Heroku master. And then as part of that process, after that happens, those things should then also be live up on Heroku, and we would see them and we would be happy. And so that is effectively my sort of high-level overview of Rails as a framework, giving you a little view of all the things that we're going to look at throughout this course. We're also going to look at more, right? We didn't even dip our toes into everything today, but we saw a little bit of a lot of the pieces that Rails has to offer, the things that make developing with Rails really, really fast. Before I'm done, are there any questions that you have that have come up while you were seeing me demonstrate Rails? Is there anything that you need some clarification on, or any questions even about what's upcoming in this course? What do we got? Anything? Yes, and so Laravel is the PHP sort of, it started its life straight up as a Rails clone. They basically said, like, we want these things in the PHP world, we're going to clone piecewise migrations and models and controllers and routing. It is now much more than just a simple Rails clone. Laravel is a very, very great framework. But you're right, you're going to see tons of similarities between Rails and Laravel. Yeah.
Laravel has a thing called middleware where you put routes together and you can say for these routes, run this middleware to do multiple pieces of middleware.
Yeah. Yeah, Rails also has a middleware stack, and you can do things like throttling with that middleware stack. You can do things like authentication, session and cookie management. So Rails has a very robust set of middleware. It's built around our HTTP project from the Ruby community called Rack. And so all of the middleware that Rails uses is Rack middleware, meaning it can be also reused on, there's other there's other web frameworks in the Ruby community, but most of them are Rack based, and the middleware can be shared between them all. Yeah. You got it. So this is the name of the controller, and this is the name of the action, and the action just means the method, the public method. Root is actually like the routing system is another example of like a domain specific language. And so it's a little bit of extra stuff layered on top of Ruby to make an executable Ruby file look more like a config file.
Right, so the blog post, what they're called, the names, the blog post,
like
the blog post represents /blog post as it's run?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we could also build these up manually. So we could say like a GET request to like / or to blog posts goes to the blog posts index action, and we could say like a post request does this and that. We can map out all of these 7 RESTful routes ourselves manually if we wanted to, and we could also pick and choose which ones we wanted or add extra routes. I tend to just use the default ones that are provided. Yeah.
If you were to make your custom route that like parameters, add slashes in it.
Yeah, so parameters, so for example, like a GET request to blog posts / some ID, that's like the show, right? So that's going to go to the blog posts show action. This is a parameter in there. You can have multiple parameters if you want, and inside of here, that parameter is accessible by way of what's called the params hash. And the params hash is, if you think back to PHP, we had our superglobals. The params hash is like a combination of the get superglobal and the post superglobal. It's all parameters that are coming either by way of the URL or by way of posted data, and then we can key in to find those things. And so in this case, params, we're pulling out a parameter from a route. In these cases, we're pulling parameters that were posted to us in our edit and creation forms. So yeah, that's how you do it, is you drop in symbols into the text to create those. And you can even like add, you can say things like ID should be like a number. And so you can add like regular expression based quantifiers on your parameters if you wanted to. Other questions, comments, concerns? Yeah. How to like visualize it in what way? Like to see like the size of it, or to interact with it, or yeah. So as a Rails developer, my primary way with interacting with the database is just the Rails console. That said, with SQLite, you can get like SQLite clients that would act similar to like PHP MyAdmin or whatnot, that would give you ability to view the tables. And like I tend to not use those so much because it's tempting to want to change things when you're in there messing with the database. But all database changes in the context of Rails should be done within a migration. But yeah, you can definitely get like a SQLite client to explore the database, explore the rows that are in the various tables. Same thing goes for Postgres. Once you deploy to Postgres, you can use like a client to connect to that and do the same kind of manipulation or viewing. Great question, thank you. Any other questions or comments that sort of popped up in your mind about how Rails operates, or any of the things that I demonstrated today? All right, let's just see if we did was it a successful deploy? Do I have a root route? And I do. And so there is our deployed app. It is styled. It is backed by fake data. And yeah, it's a bit of a sneak peek into the future of this course. You're going to build even more complicated websites throughout this course. But the first few that you build will look something like this. All right, thank you everybody for coming to class today and listening to me talk about Rails, and for participating in our brainstorming around what we need to know as web developers.